Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight I just would like to say a few words. Some of you might have heard my video from a while ago, Piano Stories. Really good video, by the way, strongly recommend it. And the writer, which many of you probably know, or at least have heard his work within the horror community, called Chris Maxim. He writes a lot of horror stories, publishes them in various places, and a lot of your favorite creators probably read them out. He's extremely talented. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, he has become immune compromised and is at high risk. He's also currently unemployed because of the situation and is seeking donations to help him with medical costs and the like. If you would be so kind to check out his plea. I know I'm not the only creator to mention this, so you might have heard this before. It would really mean a lot. I've already donated, and if you'd like to do the same, the link is at the top of the description. Thanks, guys. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Growing up, I had a childhood friend that lived relatively close by, and we were like two peas in a pod. We both were adventurous, believed in the paranormal, enjoyed astronomy, and generally just being outside. She was born in Alaska, and her dad had lived there for quite a while, so they were always into camping, hiking, fishing, skiing, you name it. It was with my friend's family that I got introduced to fishing and did a lot of camping. This happened during the mid to late 90s, and we were about 11 years old. One camping trip, we went to this lake in the forest that was surrounded by a meadow, and feeding the lake was a small stream leading out of the woods. We played in the meadow and stream all day, while my friend's dad fished. The lake wasn't very big, and because it had a meadow wall around it, he could keep an eye on our whereabouts while he fished. While messing around by the stream, the wooded area it was coming from gave me weird vibes. I can't explain it. I just felt really uneasy. The day faded away into early evening, and it was time to leave and find a camping spot. My friend's dad packed up his fishing gear, and we all walked back to the truck on this long, winding path through the woods. Once in the truck, we drove into a more remote area of the forest and made our way up this steep road that was so rough and at such an incline that I was convinced that my friend's dad was going to break his truck. He had a 4, maybe 6-cylinder Toyota pickup that was about as basic as a truck could get. In fact, I'm not even sure if the truck had 4-wheel drive, being an Alaskan outdoorsman. With years of experience, I trusted him. We finally made it up to the top, which was flat and relatively open with a big area of forest in the opposite direction from the road we drove up. We pitched our tents, got everything set up. Then my friend and I decided to go explore the area. We were maybe 50 yards from the tent when we heard a big crack as a tree branch snapped in the woods behind us. We got quiet and looked in that direction, but did not see anything. Thinking it was just a deer, we brushed it off. As we were walking, we heard it again and whispered to one another about what it could be, but carried on going. It stopped briefly, and when we were about 200 yards from our camp, we sat on a boulder looking down the steep, wooded hill overlooking the dirt road from where we had come from. Suddenly, we heard another cracking branch from behind. Whatever it was seemed to be following us. Our imaginations were going wild. We came up with everything from serial killers stalking us in the woods, to deer, to Bigfoot. When we got back to the campsite, we told her dad what we had heard and how it seemed to be paralleling us. He kind of played it off as a black bear and secured all the food. Later on, my friend confided in me that my dad had gotten out his pistol and would be sleeping with it that night. My friend and I were sharing one tent, and he was in his own tent not too far from us, so we figured that everything will be okay. I awoke sometime in the middle of the night to hearing something or someone walking outside. As I laid still listening, I could hear it quietly circling the tent. It sounded like it was walking on two legs because it had a very distinctive rhythm in how it walked. Whatever it was sounded big, as I could hear its weight as it put each foot down and walked. I could even hear relatively quiet but deep, heavy breathing at times as I lay there listening. I could hear it wandering to the other parts of the campsite and then back to our tent, almost as if it were walking in a big repetitive loop. This went on for a long time. Terrified and unable to wake my friend, I lay there listening until eventually I fell back asleep. The next morning I told my friend and her dad about it, but I didn't know if they believed me or not. Interestingly, absolutely nothing in the camp was disturbed in any way. The ground was not very soft, and in some places was covered in grass, so there were no footprints either. This is something that I have never been able to explain, and to this day, it lingers in the back of my mind when camping. I always wonder what it was that walked around our tent all night. Any scout that has been to Camp Wanoxet has heard the tale of Sagey and Sagey Island. The original tale is about a Native American boy who goes back to his village to skin and properly dispose of the dead animals that the settlers had left and killed. He starts a bonfire in an island, slowly bringing the animals across to burn in his canoe. He gets down to the last 3 animals, a bear, a deer, and a moose, when the settlers see him and shoot at him. He gets onto the island and jumps into the fire with the animals. Thanks to the fact that he was still alive and holding the animals, their spirits merge together to create what is most commonly referred to as a Wendigo. Every once in a while, he can be seen wandering the woods and streets around the camp. Now onto the story. Being as though it was my 3rd year at Camp Wanoxet, I was very comfortable staying there even at night out in the woods. Both me and my friends Kyle, Will and Ryan are sitting at our table under an awning, telling stories and just having a good time, when Kyle says to be quiet and listen. It was silent for a bit until we heard what sounded like someone running in the woods. We all look over to see antlers poking out from behind a tree. At first, we were pretty worried at the fact that a deer would get this close, but then we realized something. The antlers were 3 feet above where they should be. Right as we started to back away, it sprinted from behind the trees and slashed at our tents about 10 feet behind us and broke some other things. After about a minute of it breaking things and us getting on top of our picnic table and grabbing our knives, it ran off. For some reason, only a few other people noticed it. Our scoutmasters came running over to ask if we were okay and what happened, seeing as though we were almost crying and pretty shocked. After that encounter, I will never go back to that camp again. Whenever I think of that camp, I get the eerie feeling that I am being watched. I was 12 or so at the time. Some friends of mine were in Girl Scouts and invited me to join them for a sleepover at this old tuberculosis sanitarium in Marin, just north of San Francisco. At the time, 50 years ago now, the building was not in the best of conditions. There was an old caretaker's cabin and some outbuildings. My friend and I wandered about that first day there. Saturday and, well, we weren't the best behaved little monsters. In spite of the locked doors, we crawled through a window into the caretaker's cabin and explored in there. My friend went upstairs and I stayed down as a sentry. Already nervous, I was even more jumpy when I heard someone coming up the stairs, but it wasn't my girlfriend. There was no one there, at least visibly. Fast forward to that evening. In an attempt to go to sleep, we were overtaken by giggles. Hey, we were little girls. One of the counselors separated us so the other girls could sleep. I was placed in a bed in this sunroom. It was an enclosed room, but with windows on 3 walls. The wall I was facing, when I woke up, had a set of French doors and a balcony. Early, before anyone else was awake, I watched a woman with an old-fashioned dress and parasol walk across that balcony and descend down the stairs. I just figured it was one of the counselors, rolled over and went back to sleep. Later in the morning, after getting up and dressed, my friends and I explored that balcony, and there were no stairs. Strange. We explored the wooded acreage all around the old sanitarium, and off we went back home. It was only a few years ago I decided to do some research, and learnt that many have seen the apparitions at the facility, so I wasn't just imagining things. This happened a number of years ago. I was walking with my 2 nephews, Richard and Jay. We were doing our normal route through the forest when we walked past a tree and saw some strange scratches on it. The thing is, we walk around here a lot, and we'd never seen them before. They didn't appear to be human-made, or animal for that matter. We don't have any large animals where we live that could explain how they got there. We investigated a little bit and walked further. At least Richard and I walked further, while Jay stood next to the tree. We turned around and at that moment heard a scream, and Jay came running for his life towards us. There was a stick that had flown towards him that had been launched at his neck. We calmed him down, checked his neck and didn't see anything, and walked towards the fence towards the back of the forest. We looked at the terrain when we saw a terrifying entity. It was all black, about 2 meters in length. Its legs, its arms, its fingers were longer than usual, with these red glowing eyes. It was staring towards us. We were so scared we ran back to the beginning, went through the gate and just stood there for a few minutes. Jay said, "My neck stings." Richard and I checked his neck and saw something at the spot where he was struck. It looked like the number 7. We took a picture, and after that we spoke about what we saw. When we turned around, it was standing at the start of the forest, 20 meters between us. When the thing noticed that we had seen it, it vanished, running into the forest at inhuman speeds. We were so scared to go back in, and went back to our tents. Richard and Jay told their mum what happened, and she looked at Jay's neck. The scratch was still visible, but it was nearly gone. If anyone has ever experienced anything like this, I'd love to hear your story. Please, let me know. About 3 years ago, I went camping with my now ex-girlfriend, as she had always expressed interests but had never been. The spot we went to is in the Huron National Forest and is my go-to trail/camp spot. as it's hidden deep in the forest, and the access to the trails is close and easy for ATVs. My family had been going to this spot for about 6 years, and my friends that introduced me about 10 or so years. We went for the weekend trip, and I'm glad we didn't go for any longer. When we got there, everything was going well, except we did notice a group of people that were hanging out next to our campsite, but they were just stargazing and ended up leaving. Then around midnight is when the weird stuff started to happen. At first, it sounded like someone was laughing at us, but the laughter never ended, and got very high-pitched and sounded as it kept going. After a while, we both got kind of scared and went into the tent to try and sleep, and then that's when the laughing noise moved up higher, and they started to circle the campsite. After a while of that happening, it just suddenly stopped and then started again around 3 a.m. When it started again, the fire was going out, so I went to see if I should stoke the fire with my shotgun in hand and turned on my flashlight to see if maybe I could see any coyotes or something. But I didn't see anything or hear any movements below. This persisted until 6 a.m. and then stopped, and that finally was when we were able to get some rest. After we woke up, we checked around the campsite and didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so we packed up. Once we were packed up and good to go, I start my vehicle and it's completely dead. That really freaked me out, as I'm always paranoid about leaving things plugged in that kill the battery, and made sure everything was closed properly and unplugged, and yet somehow the battery still died. I was able to get a jump from a AAA. That phone call was hard to explain, and the lady who took the call didn't believe me, but in the end we both laughed. After that happened, I told my friend, who had shown me the campsite and also had a cabin in the same forest about 25 miles away, about what happened, and he got freaked out. He told me about 2 incidences which had happened, one at a campsite and one at his cabin. At the campsite, he stated, one night after we had all returned from the trail riding and went to bed, he stayed up to hang out by the fire and have a few drinks. While he was hanging out, he was just looking off into the distance and saw a pair of eyes up in the trees looking directly at him. He described them as bioluminescent eyes, and he flashed his high-powered flashlights at them, but there was nothing there. And as soon as the flashlight turned off, they were there looking right back at him. So he packed up and went right to bed. He didn't tell us because he didn't want to scare us. At the cabin, he was hanging out with his brother, and they were both just chilling by the fire outside when they both saw a pair of eyes looking at them from the trail that leads into the woods. They stated that the height of the eyes were looking at them. Whatever it was had to be at least 7 feet tall. They started shooting at it with their rifles, and the eyes disappeared. But once they were done, they reappeared and were closer. At that point, they both freaked out and got back into the cabin, and didn't leave until daylight. We have no idea what this could have been, but I felt very scared when these events were happening. After we spoke about it, one of the brothers thinks it's a Wendigo. I really don't know what it could have been. All I know is that I haven't been that scared since. I was 9 years old and camping out with 3 families other than my own. I was sleeping in a small tent with one of my close friends when something woke me up. I listened and heard nothing from outside at first, so I opened up the tent zipper enough to see the fire was out and knew the adults must be asleep. I closed the zipper and laid back down. Shortly after I lied down, I heard a high-pitched voice from outside the tent telling me to come out and play. I would have thought it was a person, but it was repeating itself over and over and moving close to the tent that was then far away, all the while circling it. I opened the tent and looked out, but it was pitch black. At this point, I tried to wake the friend I was in the tent with, but he pushed me off. I tried again more violently this time, and he woke up. I told him I heard something outside, but he must have not been fully awake yet because he just mumbled something and laid back down. After I spoke to my friend and tried to go to sleep, the same voice kept me up. Next morning, I told my friend who had been in the tent about it, and he said he remembered being annoyed that I woke up. So to me, that means I wasn't dreaming. I'm almost certain I was fully awake, so I doubt I hallucinated it. I know this doesn't have a satisfactory ending, but that is my real ghost story. I went hiking out in the wilderness on the outskirts of Yuma and walked about 5 miles from my car to my campsite. I brought my usual hiking gear along with my AR-15 for protection against wild animals like coyotes or snakes. My firewood supply burned up just after the sun went down, so I went to bed at around 6:30. Messed around on my phone till 7:30, passed out, and was awoken at 8:30 by a call from our mutual friend, and fell asleep again. The next time I woke up, I couldn't move. I could hear rocks moving outside, and soft footfalls in the sand right outside my tent. I heard coyotes howling earlier, so I knew that's what these were. I was sleeping with my back to the wall of the tent, and one of them pressed their nose into my back and sniffed for a good minute. I had sleep paralysis again, and I couldn't even grab my rifle to shoot them. The second thing happened a few hours later. There are 2 sections of my tent that can be seen through. It had to be a dream, but I woke up and peered through the window, and I saw a young woman and a child sitting outside my tent on a small rise, not more than 6 feet away. I asked them who they were, and the child was silent, but the woman declared, "Leave this place." They made a horrifying face, and as I went to grab my rifle, I tried to pull the trigger, but it dawned on me that something was terribly wrong and the trigger wouldn't budge. And then the child stood at once, walked away into the shrub trees behind my tent, and the woman walked on until I couldn't see her anymore. But the child passed out from under the moonlight into the shadow of the shrub tree, and because there was moonlight falling on the other side, I could watch her silhouette change shape. She became a gangly, bony freak, almost like a tall monkey, absolutely silent, and she rushed my tent. I squeezed the trigger for all it's worth, and then she collided with my tent. In that instant, I woke up, screaming and throwing a wild punch at the wall of the tent. I think whatever it was followed me. I've never been hiking to that spot again, and maybe never will try again. This took place a few years ago with my best friend. We decided to go camping in Flagstaff, a place called Lockett Meadow. We'd taken our dogs, and after a day of hiking and exploration, we played around a fire and eventually went to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to find this deep figure outside our tent, burying itself into our tent. It had a weird way of hovering back and forth over my body, and my dog, who had curled up awake and was not moving or making a sound, at the bottom of my feet. I looked over and see my best friend passing out, and his dog, which I'm sure if it was awake, but clearly I'm the only one between my friend and I'm expecting this terrifying encounter. I eventually covered my head and thought about anything to make me fall asleep. The next day I asked my friend if he had somehow been awake throughout it all, and he said no and thought I was lying. I told him maybe it was a bear, so we looked around our campsite and couldn't find anything, no trails, no prints, nothing. We also had our food out on a table near our tents, and a trash bag hung up on a broken branch. So even if it was a bear, I'm surprised it didn't get any of our stuff. Either way, I remember how scared I was seeing this dark, weird object observing our tent. It could have been the wind, a deer, a bear, who knows? But this is just one encounter of the whole camping trip. The next night, we decide to camp at Beaver Creek. Mind you, we're in Arizona, if you wish to know. However, before we were settled in, we explored Sedona, and we drove to Oak Creek and parked our car near a trail down to the water. We took our dogs and hiked the creek. After we finished jumping in and swimming and drying off, we were about to head out, and the next thing you know, we see from the corner of our eye a big rock being thrown near us, making a big splash in the water. We look up and can't see anything, so we run over the stones to get a clear view and see no one. We yell out foul words and hear no one running off or anything. When we got to our next campsite, at Beaver Creek, and set up, my friend told me throughout the trip since we started in Flagstaff, he'd had rocks being thrown at him, up until that large rock at Oak Creek. We looked at each other and thought maybe someone was following and messing with us. We sort of laughed it off and said that it was impossible, and that we were going to try and connect the dots. Well, I'm glad nothing else happened. And the next day we packed up and went home, with nothing but a memory to be justified. I consider myself open-minded, and I'm extremely skeptical and rational. I grew up in a hippie household, and my parents always tried to convince me of some alleged New Age shocking truth. But since my teens, I, with respect and determination, decided to embrace a more scientific mindset. I really like literature and gothic, dark stories though, and whenever the ghost topic comes up, I'm always happy to share the following. In the summer of 2006, I was 16, and, as every year, was spending the holidays in camping in southern Italy. A huge piece of hectarage and hectares of pine trees and Mediterranean scrub with a nice sandy beach nearby. I was having a good time doing the things teenagers always do in such places. Swimming, cycling, kissing boys next to the bonfire, and just hanging out. One night I was returning to my place, prepared to silently sneak into my tent, when I decided to stop by the bathroom before bed. It was 4 o'clock. I remember the hour exactly, as that's the time that the public lights were turned down. Street lights just went off when I arrived to the bathroom. It was a big building on the side adjacent to the street, and the men's shower and bathroom was on the opposite side to the ladies. Approaching the building, I noticed a blonde girl outside the men's showers, turning her back to me. The sight was a tad unusual. I thought she could have just been waiting for her father or brother to come out the restroom. I had to come close to her as I needed to turn the corner to reach the ladies. I kept feeling like something was off, and just as I was turning the corner, I looked back at her, unsure if asking her if she needed something. In a split second, I saw her face changing. From the moment I noticed this girl to maybe a minute later, the change had happened considerably. I saw her jawbone protrude in an unnatural manner, giving her a beastly appearance. It's hard to explain what I saw, as it was just a glimpse of a few seconds. I felt like a bucket of cold ice had been poured over me, and I went ahead, too scared to look behind my back. I kept walking on the side of the building, and soon reached the other corner and the ladies' bathroom. I was terrified, and not a chance I was going to actually enter and lock myself inside a bathroom with God knows what. This side of the building was next to another street that allowed me to return to my place for a longer path. I reached my tent and waited for the sunrise, trying to calm down. To this day, this is the experience that comes to mind when people talk about the paranormal. I believe it is absolutely possible that I just imagined the whole thing with the complicity of darkness and me being tired. But it was just such a strange sense and really gave me chills. The second experience happened years before this one. It's not as striking. In any case, I was about 13 and going back after school. I grew up in a very rural area of Tuscany, and my house is 3 kilometers from the nearest village, where the school bus stopped. My mother was a few minutes late to catching me, but I didn't mind as it was a beautiful spring day and I was expecting her to arrive soon. I walked away from the main road towards my house direction, looking at the fields on the other side and towards the hill where my mother's car should have descended, when I felt something wasn't okay. A mild sensation actually, just as something was out of place. I noticed movement from the corner of my eye as I turned and realized there was a tall blonde dog with his front paws on my backpack. I screamed more because of the surprise other than the dog, and he quickly walked away with his tail and ears low, as dogs usually do when people yell at them. I didn't think much of this, and it's not strange to meet a dog without an owner. I carried on walking, and after a short time felt again that weird sensation and immediately turned my head. I saw the dog sitting on top of my backpack. I yelled and was scared, and threw the backpack on the floor. I don't remember what happened next. I guess my mother arrived shortly after, and I went ahead with her for the day. It sounds absolutely so weird. This happened around August of this year. I'm not sure what we experienced, but whatever it was, it terrified us. So this was a hike up to Half Dome. We had a campground around 20 minutes drive away from the trailhead, and the group was composed of 18-year-old me, my uncle, a 32-year-old male, and my uncle's friend Dee. There were 2 girls with us, but they aren't relevant to the story. My uncle and his friend are both Christians, so there were no substances consumed that could be used to induce feelings. We get to our campsite, set up the camp and go to sleep after eating. We were planning to wake up at 4 to start our hike by 4:30. I randomly awoke at 3:30, like completely widely awake, and looked out my hammock, and I remember feeling this odd feeling as if I were woken up by something, and remember looking out at this moonlit scene and thinking to myself it's just like a dream. I lay back in the hammock but couldn't go to sleep, and ended up waking up my uncle and friend around 3:50. My uncle asks, "Why are you walking around at night?" And I say, "I'm not doing that." He says he woke me up for some reason and could hear someone walking around, not like an animal, but a person. I say that it's quite weird and try and brush it off. We get to the trailhead around 4:30, and it's as everyone is unloading from their car that Dee says he needs to use the restroom, which there are a couple of before the trailhead. I walked behind him and saw the car falling behind me and waiting for my uncle who had forgotten something in his own car. The short straight road from the little parking lot runs directly into a T-section with the road of the trailhead, and the bathroom which runs directly across from the intersection throughout the little field. To who have been there, know what I'm talking about. We get to the intersection and wait for Dee to escape the bathroom. We wait 10 minutes before going in to check and he's not there. I go back to my uncle and tell him, "That's weird. Maybe he went back to the car to get something he's missed." By 5:10 we're starting to worry. My uncle goes to check the car while I wait at the intersection to make sure we didn't miss him, and he went down the road from the trailhead. My uncle says he isn't there either. We decided maybe he went up to the trailhead without us for some reason, and walked up 10 minutes, and he wasn't there either. We're kind of baffled now because there are no other logical explanations for where he could have gone, and waited at the intersection for over half an hour and checked at the car, bathroom and trailhead, and you weren't there, he says. I went to the bathroom. He then asks me where my uncle is, and I say it was at the trailhead, and he asks me again. Note that it's weird as he's asked me twice, and as we're crossing the bridge to the trailhead, he sees the lights off in the riverbank, and exclaims that yes, that must be him. And I just look at him and keep walking. I thought his behavior was very strange, like he wasn't thinking straight. We finally get to the hike and it goes by as normal, except that we seem to keep losing things, such as my uncle's small red flashlight, one of the girl's gloves, a water bottle, etc., and it was just like we'd simply forgotten about them and couldn't remember where we'd left them. On the way back it got dark and we turned on our flashlights, and as we neared the end of the hike, after the two waterfalls, it began to seem as if we'd been walking for too long. My uncle also confirms this, asking me, doesn't it seem like it's taking way longer to get back? I say yeah, and I was just thinking that we kept walking, but it still seems we aren't making any progress. I've been on that trail many times, and as I was walking I couldn't help but spot how weird those events felt. After we got home, my aunt asks my uncle if we were camping, and he says, "How'd you know?" As we didn't tell them that we were going since it was a very last-minute decision. She says that he had an odd dream where she sees my uncle in a tent of a forest and someone is outside of his tent. She said she couldn't see who it was but knew there was a presence there. She said she woke up around 3 and had the strong urge to pray for him, and it worked. I don't know what you make of all of this, but I really would like your opinions. This was a few years ago. I was 11. Me and my other 4 friends went on a camping trip. Everyone was happy to be doing something different, but I wasn't. You see, when I was younger, I loved horror movies and videos, so I felt off. I then eased into them a bit and realized that if anyone tried to rob us, or worse, me and our friends, we could fight them or something. While my friend's mum, Tom's mum, had booked us a small hut to stay in during the week, but at night we would sleep in our tents. It was 8 p.m. when we left the hut, which was to the right of our campsite, and Tom's mum was a bit paranoid, so we did the typical songs and ate marshmallows, and at 9:30 we were told it was time to sleep. I got a tent with Trent, who was a good friend of mine, and started saying funny things that made me laugh. Outside was completely silent, and the only sound heard was Trent's laugh. I really wanted to go for a pee, but had watched enough horror movies that I held it in. I guess eventually I didn't want to go anymore. I turned my head around to see Trent with his eyes wide open. "Dude, aren't you going to sleep or something? It's like 11. That was the first time I felt off. Can't you hear the crunch of leaves? I stood there shaking. I didn't know what to do, pretend to be asleep and take my chances? I decided to take that option, and I told Trent, "We'll charge them. I'll go first, you wake up the others." I got up and quickly unzipped the tent lid, ran out my tent screaming, tent behind me, to find no one. Tom's mum, who slept in the hut, came out running, and she asked what the hell we were doing, and me and Trent told her what we'd heard. She said that was off because she heard footsteps in her room and hadn't slept for the last 2 hours. We heard a loud cry from a little girl like you hear in the movies. Everyone spun their head around and we heard whispers from every location. We turned to the 2 cars and ran towards them. Cody's mum had also volunteered for the whole trip as she came running out the hut. Before we explained, Tom's mum grabbed her and shoved her in one of the cars and told us to get in. But Ryan noticed one of the wheels had a puncture. It looked burnt, and it was as if it had scratches. We hurried to Cody's mum's car, and the other was fine, and we climbed in and hurried off. The mums reported this to the police, and all that they had to say is that it's very common in this area. Anyone with any advice, it would be greatly appreciated. This happened about 3 to 4 years ago. I live in Utah and have been camping my whole life. When I was roughly 12, I was in the Boy Scouts and went on a lot of camping trips with my troop. Every year, my troop went on an overnight camping trip to a lake in the Uinta Mountains called Wall Lake, where we'd backpack in a mile or so and camp around said lake. When I was old enough to join Boy Scouts, my troop had already been the year before, where one of the boys claimed to have seen a naked man running around the woods. No one really took him seriously, but it became a running joke that we would see this so-called naked man when we went to Wall Lake. The first year, it was pretty unremarkable until our hike back. When we were hiking back to our cars, we spotted the naked man about 100 feet away in the woods. After that, none of us doubted the kid who reported seeing him the year before. The next year, I was 13. We went again. And of course, we were all joking about the naked man. Again, nothing out of the ordinary happened until we were packing down our camps to get ready to go home. While we were taking down our tents, one of the boys yells, "Hey, look, it's the naked man." He was pointing at the top of a nearby cliff, and sure enough, there he was, completely naked, except for a cloth wrapped around his face like a turban, and a satchel over his shoulder. We all just stood there for a while, and a few of the older boys were yelling questions, and the like. He stayed quiet for the whole thing, but eventually he pointed at us, put his hand to his hips, and pushed down in a pull your pants down motion. At this point we were thoroughly creeped out, and he vanished from the cliff top. We all packed down faster than we've ever packed down a camp before, and sped back to our cars. I've still gone on trips to Wall Lake since, but I haven't seen any signs of the guy. He was apparently seen by enough people that he was reported in the news. At the time of these events, I wasn't too scared, but looking back, I have no idea what this guy wanted or what he could have done, and that is what scares me about this whole thing. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's camping bonanza. Thank you so much for watching, as always. Thanks to my amazing patrons whose names are on screen. If you want funky prizes for signing up, well, you just have to click the link in the description. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.